Melissa, you sure about this guy? My best friend, Sarah, always had a way of cutting straight to the chase. Jack's different, I said as I packed up the last of my apartment into cardboard boxes. He's kind, genuine, and he loves me for me, not just some idea of me. Meeting Jack was like breathing fresh air. He was a software developer with a goofy smile that could light up any room. When we met at a mutual friend's party, he spent the evening making me laugh and listening to my stories about long night shifts at the hospital. It didn't take long for us to click. Jack's mom is a bit of a tough cookie, though, I continued, deciding to lay it all out for Sarah. I hadn't told her much about Mrs. Cole. The first time I met her, she looked me over like I was a car she was about to buy, very skeptical. She made a comment about my job, said something like, "Nursing is such a cute little career, isn't it? Like I'm playing dress up or something." Sarah snorted. Well, just watch yourself around her. These mother-in-laws can be tricky. Jack and I had dated for 2 years before he popped the question. He did it in such a simple yet perfect way, during a picnic in the park where we had our first date. It wasn't fancy, but it was us. I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small but lovely, filled with close friends and family, except Mrs. Cole, who spent most of the time critiquing the floral arrangements and whispering to relatives. I tried to brush it off. I was marrying Jack, not his mom, I reminded myself. Jack suggested buying a house in the suburbs, I continued. It's beautiful, but the mortgage would mean tightening our belts for a while. Damn, straight into the deep end, huh? How do you feel about that? I hesitated, my hands fiddling with the tape dispenser. I'm not sure. It's a big commitment, and with my shifts, it's not like I have a lot of spare cash floating around. Make sure it's what you both want, Mel. It's not just his life, it's yours too. I knew she was right. The idea of moving to a quieter place was appealing, especially considering the chaos of hospital life. But the financial strain was intimidating. Still, Jack was persuasive, saying things like, "We'll make it work, Mel. We always do." And his optimism was infectious. "We'll see," I said finally. "Let's get these boxes down to the truck." It had been a few months since Jack and I moved into our new house. I was still adjusting to the rhythm of paying the hefty mortgage every month, while Jack took care of our other expenses. Life was settling into a new kind of normal until the day Jack came back from visiting his mom, and everything turned upside down. Jack walked through the door, not alone but with his mother, Mrs. Cole, who had a grim look and a suitcase that looked like it housed her entire life. "Mel, Mom's going to stay with us for a bit. She's not feeling great," Jack said, as if it was a small, trivial change to our daily lives. I stood there, mouth slightly open, a frown forming. "Jack, when were you going to discuss this with me?" My voice was calm, but the annoyance was hard to mask. "Look, I know this is sudden, but she's really ill," Jack replied, his eyes pleading for understanding. Mrs. Cole, setting her suitcase down with a heavy thud, chimed in. "Those doctors don't know anything. They just want to steal the little pension I have left. I'm going to follow a special treatment plan my friend suggested. She just got back from some island and swears by it." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Jack, we should have talked about this. We could arrange for a nurse or find a good facility." Jack's expression hardened. "Mel, I owe her. She's my mom. We're not sending her anywhere." Mrs. Cole walked over and hugged Jack tightly, giving me a look over his shoulder that could chill coffee. "Thank you, son. At least someone cares about me." As she released Jack and began surveying the room, her criticism started. "All this furniture is all wrong. It's blocking the energy flow. And, Melissa, really, this place is a mess," she declared, her voice filled with a mix of disdain and condescension. Jack rushed to her side, nodding and muttering agreements. I clenched my fists, feeling my space and my opinion shrinking by the second. Over the next few days, my home turned into Mrs. Cole's personal project. Every morning started with her critiques. Melissa, these curtains are all wrong. They block the sunlight and positive vibes. And why is there so much clutter here? Jack was no help. Every time I tried to discuss a boundary or compromise, he stood by his mother. Mel, she's just trying to help. Let's just do things her way for a while. One evening, I reached my breaking point. Jack, we need to talk. Now, I said firmly as I pulled him aside. Your mother is taking over our home, and you keep siding with her. You're my husband. I thought we were supposed to be a team. Jack sighed, running his hands through his hair. I know it's tough, but she's family. We have to look after her. She's old and alone. I get that she's your mom, but where do I fit into this? Am I just supposed to nod and smile and let her redo our entire house? When do my feelings get considered? My voice cracked a bit at the end. Jack looked torn, his face a mix of frustration and guilt. I'm sorry, Mel. I didn't realize it was this bad for you. Let's sit down with Mom tomorrow and set some ground rules. The next day never came for that talk. Mrs. Cole had bigger plans, and Jack, as always, was swept up in her current. I retreated, feeling more like a guest in my own home with each passing day. The tension in our house was ramping up each day, and I was caught in a relentless cycle of exhaustion. Balancing night shifts at the hospital with the increasing demands at home was wearing me down. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling night shift, I collapsed into bed, hoping for a few precious hours of sleep. But peace was a luxury I couldn't afford, not with Mrs. Cole around. Barely an hour into my sleep, her voice, shrill and piercing, jolted me awake. Melissa, how can you sleep at a time like this? I'm ill and there's nothing to eat. You need to take care of me, she bellowed from the kitchen. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with fatigue, and stumbled into the kitchen. Mrs. Cole, I just came off a night shift. I really need to sleep. Can it wait a bit? She was rummaging through the cabinets, clattering pots and pans. No, it cannot wait. I need proper nutrition. Look at this, there's nothing here I can eat. I leaned against the doorframe, barely keeping my eyes open. What exactly do you need? I'll make something quick. This. She thrust a crumpled magazine page at me. I need a meal with these ingredients. They're essential for my condition. With a heavy heart, I started pulling out whatever was closest to the list, trying to cobble together a meal that would appease her. It was slapdash, but it would have to do. After eating, she wasn't done with her demands. Now, come rearrange my room. The bed needs to be on the other side, and hang the mirror on the north wall. It's good for prosperity. That evening, when Jack came home, I was at my breaking point. Jack, we need to talk. Your mom, she's not as sick as she says. I asked her to get checked at the hospital, to get a proper diagnosis, but she refuses. She doesn't trust hospitals. She's doing what she believes in. Why can't you support that? Because it's not practical. I'm a nurse, Jack. I know what care looks like, and this isn't it. She's capable of taking care of herself. She's manipulating us. Jack shook his head, disappointment etched across his face. I can't believe you, Melissa. You're supposed to be compassionate. How can you be so heartless? Feeling defeated, I walked away from the conversation, my mind a whirl of frustration and sadness. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for. I loved Jack, but living with his mother under these conditions was turning our home into a battleground, and I was losing. A month rolled by, and miraculously, Mrs. Cole was prancing around the house like a spring chicken, the picture of health. Her miraculous recovery had me doubting the severity of her illness in the first place. It was high time we discussed her moving back to her place. One evening, as we were clearing the dishes, I broached the topic. Mrs. Cole, you seem much better now. Have you thought about when you might go back to your apartment? She didn't even blink, washing a plate with a slow, deliberate motion. Oh, I've taken care of that. I canceled the lease. I'm staying here permanently. I nearly dropped the dish I was holding. Permanently? Yes, dear. It's for the best. I'm here with family. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't part of the plan. I found Jack in the living room, deep into some game on his phone. Jack, we need to talk. Your mom just told me she's canceled her lease. She plans to stay here permanently. Jack looked up, his expression neutral. Yeah, I thought she might. It's better this way, she's family. But we didn't discuss this. Jack, we can't afford another person in the house. And honestly, her being here it's a lot for me to handle. Jack sighed, putting down his phone. Melissa, it's only been a month. You haven't really given it a chance. We can make this work. We're a family. Feeling cornered, I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts to manage the mortgage and the growing expenses. Meanwhile, Jack's contribution remained the same, but the burden didn't feel evenly distributed anymore. Back at home, mealtimes turned into another battleground. Mrs. Cole insisted on a specific diet, lean, bland, utterly tasteless stuff that sapped the joy out of cooking and eating. One night, as I served dinner, Jack made a face. What's this? It tastes like cardboard. It's what your mother requires, I replied, my patience wearing thin. Well, can you cook something different for me then? Something with a bit of flavor? I clenched my jaw, holding back a sharp retort. Jack, I'm not running a restaurant here. I'm working day and night. If you want something different, maybe help out? Jack pushed his plate away, his mood darkening. Forget it. I'll order something. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Mrs. Cole, noticing the tension, finally spoke up one evening. Melissa, I see you're stressed about money. I'll give you some each week to help out. True to her word, she started handing me $100 to $200 every week. It wasn't much, but it helped ease the pressure slightly. Yet, the core issue remained unaddressed. It started with little things, missing earrings, a bracelet here, a necklace there. I'd put them down, and then poof, gone. I thought I was just being forgetful, until more items began disappearing. First, it was my gold jewelry, and then household items like a vase and some small decorative statuettes. It didn't add up. I wasn't misplacing these things, they were being taken. One evening, I finally voiced my suspicions to Jack. I think your mom might be taking my things. My jewelry's gone, and now other items are missing too. Jack's reaction was instant and intense. I can't believe you'd think so low of my mom. She's not a thief. With no way to secure my belongings at home, I started taking my remaining jewelry to work. It was ridiculous, carrying around valuables, because I couldn't trust the security of my own home. But what else could I do? Then one day, I came home early from my shift, the sun still high in the sky. What I saw in front of our house stopped me dead in my tracks. Mrs. Cole had set up a makeshift table on the sidewalk, covered with what looked like a garage sale setup. But it wasn't just random knickknacks, it was my stuff, my cosmetics, some clothes, and even personal items, all laid out for anyone to buy. Mrs. Cole, what is this? I approached, my voice shaking with anger. Oh, Melissa. I'm just helping out. You said we needed money, so I'm making some, she replied cheerily, as if she was doing me a favor. This is my stuff. You can't just sell my things. I exclaimed, grabbing a sweater off the table. Look, I'm just trying to help. You keep saying money's tight, so I thought I'd clear out some clutter and make a few bucks, she explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. I was seething, so that's where her money comes from, which she shared so generously with us. Without another word, I started packing up everything. My hands trembled with rage as I stuffed my belongings into bags. I called Jack immediately, my words tumbling out. Jack, your mom is selling my things on the street. You need to come home now. He was silent for a moment when he arrived and saw the scene. His mother, caught in the act, tried to explain, but I was too furious to listen. Melissa, she was just trying to help, Jack said finally, siding with her yet again. Help? By selling my personal items? I couldn't hide my disbelief. This isn't helping, Jack. This is crossing a line. I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I hired a locksmith to install a new lock on our bedroom door. I moved all my valuables and anything I cared about into our room and turned it into my personal fortress. At least in there, my world remained untouched. Jack was cold about it, saying I was overreacting. You're locking away from your family, Melissa. That's what you're doing. Family doesn't steal from each other, Jack, I retorted, my voice icy. He didn't have much to say after that. The house felt more divided than ever, my little locked room versus the rest of the space, which seemed increasingly dominated by Mrs. Cole's whims. For a brief spell, life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. Mrs. Cole kept to herself, and my belongings remained untouched. I began to relax a little, hoping that maybe, just maybe, we had reached an understanding. But that peace was short-lived. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, too quiet. Instinctively, I felt something was off. I dropped my bag and headed straight for my room, the sanctuary I had locked away from the world. The door, which I always kept locked, was ajar. My heart sank. I pushed the door open and there she was, Mrs. Cole, rummaging through my dresser, her hands full of my jewelry. The sight of her ignited a fury in me I had never felt before. Mrs. Cole, what on earth do you think you're doing? My voice was sharp, laced with anger. She jolted, clearly not expecting me. Her face morphed quickly from shock to defiance. I stormed out to the living room and yelled for Jack, who was in the kitchen. He came running, a look of concern on his face that quickly turned to irritation when he saw the scene. Jack, look at your mother. She's stealing from me. I pointed towards Mrs. Cole, who followed meekly, clutching my jewelry to her chest. Jack looked from me to his mother, his expression darkening. Melissa, why must you always assume the worst? She's my mother. Your mother who's standing right here with my jewelry in her hands. I couldn't believe he was still trying to defend her. He turned on me, his voice rising. You know what, I'm tired of this, Melissa. Tired of your constant complaining, your accusations, your distrust. His mother stood by, nodding along to every word he said, a smug look on her face. You don't cook properly anymore, you hide things, you separate yourself from us. What kind of family is that? Jack continued, his words slicing through any remaining bond we had. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone else, someone who would choose his thieving mother over his wife. I want a divorce, Jack, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter but necessary. His response was immediate and cold. Fine. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, papers, and cold, silent meals. We agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds. I didn't argue, I just wanted out. I found a small apartment and moved my most precious belongings there, leaving behind a life I could no longer bear. Driving away, I didn't look back. I had new beginnings to chase, and this time I would make sure they were filled with trust and respect, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Jack and his mother could have each other, and I would finally have myself. I came back to the house to pick up the last of my things, expecting it to be quiet. Instead, I was met with fury. As soon as I stepped through the door, Jack was on me like a storm. There you are, you vile woman. Where is my car? His face was red, his voice loud enough to shake the windows. What are you talking about, Jack? I didn't take your car, I said, genuinely confused and taken aback by his aggression. Don't play dumb with me, Melissa. My car's gone, and you took it because you want revenge. He stepped closer, his eyes wild. His mother, sitting in a chair with a blanket around her shoulders, chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. She's always been awful, Jack. I told you she was no good. I was speechless. The situation was spiraling, and I had no idea how to calm it down. Before I could gather my thoughts to respond, Jack's phone rang. He snatched it up, still glaring at me. His face changed from anger to confusion as he listened. What? An accident? My car? He paused, looking between his phone and his mother. Who was driving it? His mother's face went pale. I watched as the truth came crashing down. The room went silent except for the voice on the other end of the phone line, which I couldn't hear. Jack ended the call and turned to his mother, his voice shaky with restrained rage. Mom, tell me you didn't take my car. His mother started to sob, her hands covering her face. I just wanted to go for a ride. I didn't mean any harm. You weren't supposed to drive it. You're not on the insurance. Do you understand what this means? Jack's voice rose with each word. I stood there, watching the drama unfold, the pieces falling into place. Jack's anger boiled over. Get out. I can't even look at you right now. You're going to pay for this, every last cent. His mother tried to plead with him, but he wasn't having it. He grabbed her things and shoved them at her, pushing her towards the door. Go. I'll be contacting a lawyer about this. She was crying, a pitiful, wailing sound that might have once made me feel sorry for her. Not today. Today, it was just noise. As the door slammed behind her, Jack turned to me, suddenly softening. Melissa, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Can we start over? Maybe we can. I cut him off, my own voice calm but firm. Jack, you never stood up for me. Not once. How could I ever trust you to protect me or us? I can't be with someone who doesn't see me, who doesn't believe in me. After the divorce was finalized, and the house sold, splitting the money felt like the last cord tying me to a life that was no longer mine. I found a cozy apartment in a friendly neighborhood. The first time I made the mortgage payment, I was relieved. It was nothing like the suffocating debt of our old home. This was manageable, something that didn't keep me up at night. The place was small, but every corner of it was filled with possibilities. Decorating it became my new project, a way to reclaim my space and my identity. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I was arranging some books on a new shelf, my phone rang. It was my best friend, Sarah. Hey, Melissa. How's the new apartment treating you? Sarah's voice was always bubbly, even through the phone. It's great, Sarah. Finally feels like I'm breathing again, I said, smiling as I looked around my little living room. I heard about the lawsuit. Jack really went through with it against his mom, huh? Her tone was a mix of disbelief and curiosity. I chuckled, not without a hint of irony. Oh, he did. And he won. His mom has to pay for all the repairs to the car. Last I heard, she had to pick up a job because of it. No way. She's working? After all those years of acting like the queen bee? Sarah's surprise was palpable. Yep, reality hit her hard. They'd been at each other's throats since the court decision. It's a mess, but honestly, Sarah, they dug that hole for themselves, I said, not able to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. After hanging up, I thought about how much had changed. Jack and his mother were a constant source of drama, and now, distanced from it, my life was mine again, quiet, peaceful, mine. Over the next few months, I threw myself into decorating my new apartment and taking up hobbies I neglected. My evenings were no longer about navigating family dramas, but about rediscovering what made me happy, reading, painting, and sometimes, just watching old movies. One evening, while I was painting a canvas with broad, vibrant strokes, my phone rang. It was Jack. Melissa, hi. Just wanted to check in. How are you? His voice was tentative, unsure. I'm good, Jack. Really good, actually. Just working on a painting right now. I responded, my tone polite but distant. That sounds great. I'm glad you're doing well. He paused, and I could almost hear him struggling to find the right words. Listen, I've been doing some thinking. I cut him off before he could continue. Jack, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But for me, I've already found it, my peace. I need to focus on that. Hanging up, I looked around my little apartment, my sanctuary, filled with things that brought me joy. The phone call hadn't stirred the old chaos, it had only affirmed my new path. Hi, I'm Jenna. My life, pretty much like my coding, was streamlined, efficient, logical. I worked as a website developer for a big IT corporation. Every day was a new puzzle, figuring out how to make shopping online as easy as breathing for people who'd probably never meet me. Everything was ticking along just fine until they shuffled me off to a different branch to help jumpstart a sluggish project. That's where I bumped into Alex. Now, let me tell you about Alex. He was like a whirlwind, always buzzing around, full of ideas, and always ready to grab everyone's attention in the room. I remember the first time we really talked. It was by the coffee machine, that old sputtering beast that was the unofficial meeting spot in the office. I was trying to figure out why it hated me when he sauntered over. Struggling? He had this smirk, like he knew exactly how annoying that machine was. Yeah, this thing is a beast, I replied, smacking it lightly. They say you gotta sweet-talk it, Alex said, winking. He picked up the sugar packets, shaking them like he was about to perform a magic trick. Or bribe it. Finally, coffee machine hissed and sputtered out my much-needed coffee. We laughed, and that's how it started. Simple. Over cups of terrible coffee, we started chatting about work, then movies, music, and everything in between. Alex wasn't just talk, though. The guy had ambition that could light up a city. He was in software development, always juggling half a dozen projects, each more complex than the last. A few weeks in, he asked me out. Not in a sweet, shy way. Oh no, Alex wasn't about that. So, Jenna, when are you gonna let me take you out? I promise an evening not as bitter as this office coffee, he'd thrown down, grinning over his mug. Dating him was a whirlwind. He was passionate, always pushing boundaries, making plans. We hit off so well that when it was time for me to head back to my old department, the thought of not seeing him every day was a downer. But we made it work. Long calls, weekend visits, and constant messaging filled the gaps until he proposed a year later. It was as direct as our first date invite. I laughed, cried a bit, and said yes. Soon, I met Alex's mother, Judith, a warm and inviting woman who welcomed me with open arms. Our connection was instant, bonded over Sunday dinners and shared stories of Alex as a cheeky child. The wedding was modest but beautiful, held in a small garden with our closest friends and family. It was perfect, filled with laughter, good food, and dancing under string lights. After our wedding, Alex moved into my apartment. It felt like the start of something wonderful, with every evening a chance to dream together. Life with Alex was never dull. We'd spend our weekdays buried in work, me at my corporation, and him at his buzzing tech startup. When the weekend rolled around, we'd switch off our work modes. Sometimes, we'd just kick back at home, or we'd head over to his mom's place. It was on one of those lazy Sunday afternoons at Judith's, when Alex first brought up his big idea. We were lounging in her sunlit living room, Judith fussing around with some tea and cookies. Mom, Jenna, I've been thinking, Alex began, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he was onto something big. What if we started our own thing? A platform for manufacturers to sell their products directly to customers. I remember looking over at Judith, who just shrugged as if to say, "He's your husband, you deal with it." Alex, that sounds huge, I said, trying to keep my voice light. But starting something like that from scratch? It's a lot of money, a lot of risk. But think about the potential, Jen. We could build something amazing, all our own, he pressed, his enthusiasm bubbling over. I loved his passion, really, I did. But practicality was screaming in my ear. I know, love, but we need a solid plan. It's not just about having the idea, it's about making it work financially. Judith nodded, handing us our tea with a cautious smile. Alex leaned forward, his hands animated as he spoke. I've already looked into it. We can take out a loan, get started with a small team. I've even got some contacts ready to jump on board as soon as we say go. I took a deep breath, the weight of his expectations pressing down on me. Alex, starting a business on a loan is risky. What if it doesn't pan out? We'd be left with nothing but debt. Judith put a comforting hand on my shoulder, giving me a supportive squeeze. Alex shook his head, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. Sometimes you gotta take risks, Jen. No guts, no glory, right? I tried a different angle, hoping to get through to him. Look at all the successful platforms we know. They were built by teams, by corporations with deep pockets. We're just two people. But that's how the big players started, babe. In garages, at kitchen tables. We could be like them, and we don't have to quit our jobs right away. I'll go first, get it off the ground. The conversation went round in circles for hours. In the end, Alex did what he always did when he had set his mind on something. He charged ahead. The next thing I knew, he'd quit his job, taken out a loan, and rented a small office space. He was all in, expecting me to follow. When he told me what he'd done, my heart sank. Alex, this is too fast. We should have planned more, saved more. He was unpacking a box of his belongings in the new office, not even looking at me as he spoke. I thought you'd be happy, Jen. I thought you'd be proud. Despite his confidence, I didn't quit my job. I couldn't. The thought of both of us floating without a safety net was terrifying. Alex saw it as distrust, a lack of faith in his vision. I saw it as being the only thing that might keep us from drowning. Alex's new office was buzzing with activity by the time I swung by one evening after my own long day at work. He'd rented a sleek, glass-fronted space downtown, filled it with the latest tech, and hired a team faster than you could say startup. As I walked through the door, the first person to greet me wasn't Alex, but his new secretary, Lisa, a young woman with a bright smile. "Hi, you must be Jenna. Alex has told us so much about you," she said, her voice as polished as the apple she was polishing on her blouse. "Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you, Lisa," I replied, my tone hiding the churn of discomfort in my stomach. I glanced around, taking in the rows of busy desks, the oversized motivational posters screaming, "Think big." It felt more like a Silicon Valley scene than a modest startup. Alex spotted me from his office and waved me in. He was leaning back in his chair like a CEO from some glossy magazine shoot, grinning from ear to ear. "Jen, what do you think? We're really kicking off here," he exclaimed as I entered. "It's impressive, Alex. But aren't you scaling up too fast?" I frowned, looking around at all the new equipment and employees. "Babe, to make money, you gotta spend money. We need the best to be the best," he replied, his voice filled with that irritating confidence that had started to grate on me. "But hiring so many people so quickly, the fancy office, the tech, how are we covering this?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex strutted from his desk, sweeping his hand through the air as if brushing away my concerns. "Investments, Jen. You gotta spend big to catch the big fish. We're hosting a launch dinner next week, going to dazzle them with our vision." The dinner he was talking about turned out to be at one of the fanciest places in town. He'd even had glossy business cards made up, heavy and embossed with gold detailing, which he handed out to anyone who looked remotely interested in his pitch. Watching him work the room was like watching a play, every gesture calculated, every smile timed to perfection. As the evening wound down, I pulled him aside, my worry turning into frustration. "Alex, this isn't sustainable. We should be careful with expenses until we actually start earning." Alex's face hardened, his smile slipping away. "Jen, you really need to start seeing the bigger picture. This is how the successful do it. You think rich, you live rich, you become rich. That's the mindset we need. But real success doesn't just come from acting the part," I argued, feeling my temper rise. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "And what would you know about that? No offense, Jen, but I'm making something great here. Maybe try supporting me instead of dragging me down, huh? That stung. More than I expected. I backed off, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay, Alex. Okay. From that night on, I stopped pushing back. I just helped out where I could, taking on tasks for the business in the evenings after my day job. It was clear that Alex didn't just want to create something lasting, he wanted the lifestyle, the status. A year into this grand venture of Alex's, the cracks in his ambitious facade had widened into gaping holes. The once bustling office was quieter now, the energy dimmed. Only a couple of tech specialists and Lisa, the secretary, were left. The rest had been let go one by one as the money drained like sand through fingers. I came home one evening to find Alex pacing in the living room, his face drawn, eyes flicking up to meet mine with a mix of defiance and desperation. Jen, we need to pump more money into the business. It's just a tough phase, it'll pass. He started off before I could even set down my keys. I sighed, dropping my bag onto the couch. Alex, we've been at this tough phase for over a year. How much more can we afford to lose? Maybe it's time to think about winding down. He rounded on me, his voice sharp and loud. Quit? You just don't get it, do you? You're too comfortable being a slave to your paycheck, too scared to really live free. His words stung, slashing through the tense air between us. A slave? Really, Alex? Is that what you think of me? Someone trying to keep us afloat while you play billionaire on borrowed dimes? I shot back, anger flaring. He didn't respond, just stormed out of the room, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. 6 months later, things hadn't improved. They'd gotten worse. One afternoon, I came home to find the driveway empty. He'd sold our family car, our only car, to fund another desperate attempt to save his sinking ship. He greeted me at the door with a sheepish look, almost like he knew he'd crossed a line. Jen, I had to. We needed the cash. I'll get it back, I promise, he said quickly, as if rushing to fill the silence before I could react. I just shook my head, too tired to argue anymore. Alex, where does it end? You sold our car without even talking to me about it. What's next? He shrugged, a hollow, defeated gesture. Whatever it takes. From then on, I pulled double duty. My paycheck covered our rent, the groceries, and every little expense in between while Alex's dreams sucked up everything else. Every night, I'd lie awake, the weight of our world on my shoulders, listening to the silence of the apartment. It was like living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Judith, Alex's mom. The tremor in her voice when I answered set my heart racing. Jenna, darling, I hate to bother you, but I've got these people here, these creditors, and they're talking about taking the house. They say Alex put it up as collateral. What's going on? I froze, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. What? No, that can't be right, Judith. Let me handle this. I'll call you back soon. I hung up, my mind spinning. Alex had promised no more risks after the car incident. I waited all day for him to come home, rehearsing what I would say, how I would stay calm. But when he walked through the door, looking tired and disheveled, all my plans fell apart. Alex, did you mortgage your mom's house for a loan? I blurted out, unable to contain my anxiety. He tossed his keys on the table, avoiding my gaze. Yeah, I did. We needed the cash flow to keep the business alive. It's going to pay off, Jen, you'll see. How could you gamble with your mom's home? I exclaimed, feeling my temper rise as my voice cracked with emotion. It's not a big deal, Jen. This is how business works. You invest big, you win big. We're on the brink of something huge here, he argued, his voice firm, almost rehearsed. But what about your mom? Where is she supposed to go? My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Alex shrugged, a casual, heartless gesture that made me flinch. She won't have to go anywhere. It's all legal stuff, nobody's going to throw an old lady out on the street. Plus, our state has mild winters, she'll manage if it comes to that. The ease with which he dismissed the gravity of the situation horrified me. That night, I couldn't sleep, tormented by the image of Judith, homeless because of us, because of a gamble Alex chose to take. The next morning, I made a decision. I went to my parents' house, seeking refuge and advice. My father, a seasoned investor who'd always been wary of Alex's rash decisions, greeted me with concern. "Jenna, what's wrong? You look troubled," he said, guiding me to the living room. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Dad, I need to borrow some money to pay off the loan on Judith's house. Alex put it up as collateral without telling anyone, and now it's at risk." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Jenna, I'll help because it's Judith, but you need to think hard about your marriage. Is this the life you want? Constantly cleaning up financial messes?" As I lay in bed at my parents' house that night, the reality of my father's words echoed in my mind. Alex had crossed a line, involving his own mother in his reckless schemes, showing a side of him I could hardly recognize. 3 days later, I returned home, my mind a chaotic mix of relief and unresolved tension. However, as I tried my key in the lock, it wouldn't turn. Confused and frustrated, I jiggled the key harder, thinking the lock was jammed. Nothing worked. With a sinking feeling, I dialed Alex's number, but it went straight to voicemail. With nowhere else to go, I headed to Judith's house, hoping to at least bring her some good news. I arrived at Judith's to find her pruning her rose bushes, the sun setting softly behind her. "Jenna, what a surprise, dear. Everything okay?" she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hi, Judith. I have some news. My dad agreed to help with the loan. You won't lose the house," I said, managing a small smile. Her eyes welled up as she hurried over and enveloped me in a warm hug, her relief palpable. "Oh, Jenna, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're an angel." We were just stepping inside when the doorbell rang. Judith answered it, and there stood Alex, with Lisa clinging to his arm, smiling triumphantly. My heart froze. "Alex? What are you doing here?" I stammered, confusion and dread mingling in my chest. Alex's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Jenna, I see you've been busy. Unlike you, Lisa here supports me. In fact, she believes in me so much that we're together now. And oh, I filed for divorce. You're holding me back." Judith gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Alex, what?" "And there's more," Alex continued, pulling out some papers from his jacket. "I sold your apartment. Needed the money for the business. We'll be living here with Mom. You should find somewhere else to stay." The papers felt heavy in my hand. Divorce papers. Sale documents. My life, reduced to a few sheets of cold, legal prose. "You sold our home? How could you?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Lisa sneered, clinging tighter to Alex. "Because we're going places, Jenna. And you're just dead weight." Judith's face reddened with anger. She grabbed a nearby kitchen towel and attacked Alex and Lisa with it. "Get out. I'm ashamed of you, Alex. How dare you treat Jenna like this?" Alex and Lisa were screaming as they dodged Judith and the towel, and I was looking at this surreal scene with mixed feelings. As Judith was out of breath and stopped, Alex straightened his clothes and turned to a tearful Lisa with a wry grin. "Let's go. We don't need this." Before he could leave, Judith turned to me, her eyes fierce with resolve. "Jenna, dear, I'm signing this house over to you. You saved it. It's yours." Alex stopped in his tracks, his face a mask of disbelief. "Mom, you can't." "I can, and I will. Now get out. Take your friend and leave my house." The door slammed behind them, leaving a stunned silence. Judith turned to me, her expression softening. "Stay here, Jenna. As long as you need." After the betrayal and upheaval of the last few days, I was emotionally drained but determined to set things right. Following my father's advice, I met with a lawyer he recommended, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Thompson. Over coffee in her stark, uncluttered office, we laid out the details of my case against Alex. "So, he sold the apartment without your consent?" Ms. Thompson asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "Yes, and probably forged my signature to do it," I replied, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief as I handed her the fraudulent documents. Ms. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "We'll take this to court. I'll file for the immediate reversal of the sale and push for a fraud charge." The legal wheels turned faster than I expected. In court, Alex's facade of competence crumbled under the weight of evidence. When confronted with the forgery, he had no defense. "Your Honor, I was just trying to save my business," Alex stammered, avoiding my gaze. The judge was unmoved. "You committed fraud, Mr. Carter. This court sentences you to probation and prohibits you from holding any senior management position in any company. Let this be a lesson in responsibility." Meanwhile, Judith, with Ms. Thompson's help, proved that Alex had taken the loan against her house without her knowledge or consent. The judge ordered Alex to compensate his mother for the emotional and financial distress caused. Outside the courtroom, as the final divorce proceedings took place, Alex's desperation was palpable. "Jenna, please, don't ask for any more money. I'm ruined," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a stranger driven by greed. "I don't want your money, Alex. But you will replace my car, the one you sold without asking me." A couple of months later, his business, now hopelessly in debt, crumbled without his mismanagement to sustain it. Lisa left as soon as the reality of his financial situation hit home. Alone and barred from any significant corporate role, Alex was a broken man. But that was no longer my concern. With the legal battles behind me, I returned to the apartment that was once again legally mine. One afternoon, as I arranged books on a new shelf, the doorbell rang. It was the delivery of the new car Alex had bought me, a sleek, reliable model that was everything the old one had been and more. I signed off on the paperwork, the final tie to my old life with Alex severed. After the whirlwind of betrayal and legal battles, life settled into a new, steadier rhythm. My days were filled with the familiar comforts of my job. Each project and code line I crafted at work reminded me why I had clung to this stability, why it was so crucial not to leap blindly into Alex's fantasies. My salary, once stretched to cover his debts, now afforded me small luxuries and peace of mind. Every so often, I caught snippets of Alex's new life. He was doing physical labor now, something vastly different from the suits and boardrooms he had aspired to dominate. It was hard work, paying off the mountains of debt he had accumulated through his reckless ambitions. I felt a twinge of something, pity, perhaps, or just relief, that it was no longer my disaster to manage. Despite everything, Judith and I remained close. Our bond, forged in the fire of Alex's deceit, had only strengthened. She often joked, "You got rid of the worst part of our family and kept the best," during our weekly coffee meetups. Her laughter was a balm to the still tender parts of my heart. One breezy Saturday afternoon, we sat in her garden, the late spring blooms a burst of color against the green. Judith had just come back from her lawyer's office, a stack of papers in hand. "Jenna, I've made it official," she said, handing me a document. "The house will be yours one day. Not that I'm planning on going anywhere anytime soon." I took the papers, a lump forming in my throat. "Judith, you don't have to do this. You've already given me so much." She waved me off, her voice firm but kind. "I want to, dear. You saved this old house, you saved me. It's only right." We spent the afternoon reminiscing and planning future renovations to the house, small projects we could tackle together. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Judith leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, Jenna, I always thought it was the big, explosive moments that defined us. But it's not. It's the quiet days, the simple acts of kindness, the steady work. That's what really builds a life." Her words echoed in my heart as I drove home later. She was right. Life wasn't about the dramatic falls or the swift climbs, but about the steady, often unnoticed, day-to-day resilience. Back at my apartment, I looked around at the space that had once been a shared dream, now solely mine. It was quieter, simpler, less extravagant than Alex had wanted it to be, but it was real and it was mine. The next morning, as I prepared for work, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Grateful for the job that had sustained me, for Judith's unwavering support, and for the lessons learned. I was grateful, too, for my own strength, which had carried me through the storm and out the other side.